Just give
And
me a few. Just give me a few minutes just to share it.
okay. So, sir, again, after a long time, we are back to our API.
It's just a second. Let me just share.
Okay, so everyone who is watching this video or participating in this session, Sarzia shared the Google Drive, the book. So you can download from the Google Drive. I'll try to add these video chat to the description of video when I'll going to I'll upload to the YouTube. So I'll try to add the chat things to the description. So if you're watching this video later on the YouTube,
this is already included in the what do you call Bootcamp 2021
okay.
repository.
This is sir, great. Just to remind you boys that please keep pin or bookmark the Bootcamp 2021. So you does not need to be worried about where you will get this stuff. This stuff is available in our Bootcamp GitHub repo page, so you can get it. So, sir, everything is good. Facebook is live, recording is on, and where is our?
I was just waiting for Fawaz, our star teacher.
Yeah, I see.
Assalamualaikum, sir. I'm here, sir. I'm here, sir.
Okay. And
Fawaz
what
come
I'm going to do,
always very silently and wait to be announced as our chief guest.
No, it's not like that.
now we are going to start covering this book. And once we are done with this book, we will understand two technologies of developing APIs. We have already covered GraphQL. We have covered SQL databases and graph databases. We are going to now cover open APIs, which is basically we have done REST APIs so far, but we have not covered the open API specification, which creates the requirements. And basically, before developing the REST APIs, we have covered in a little bit, we have covered Postman and so on. Once we are done with this, Fawaz is a part of a team which is developing tools for Cloud API development. It's a Cloud CLI. Basically, it helps you create these APIs just by giving a GraphQL specification or Open API specification. And if you will love the tool, it's already 50–60% done. It's going to be open source, and we are going to distribute it around the world. How to quickly develop APIs.
This is great, sir. Because
yes.
So, sir, before going to the open API and going back to the designing API, could you share a opinion on the APIs once again? I need some recap because we have started from the API but moved towards different things. Now we are again onto the API. So I request you to share some things about the API, objectives, goals, and why moving towards Swaggers and open API.
Yes, basically, if you think about APIs, the thing how to connect different software applications. And it also applies to from the client in the browser to the server, as well as machine-to-machine communication. We can also do all these different communications between software is done through application programming interfaces. And they are now two global standards for developing open applications. There are many other standards as well, but the two most popular are GraphQL, which is the latest, and open API specifications. Before I get started, What I'll do is, if you want to develop an API, for example, if you think about it, you can think about it in another way. If you want to develop a server, now if I say if you want to develop a server or you want to develop an API, what is the difference between them? I think some mic is not mute. Anyway, as I said, there are two kinds of API standards: Open API and GraphQL API. We have already covered GraphQL API in depth. If I say, before I get started, if I say, Anish, I'm developing a server, Wes, and if I say, or Rao or anybody else, and if I'm developing an API, what's the difference between the two?
Between the API and the server,
Yes.
API is completely different and it is cost effective and time effective. You can build an API easily as compared to server, because for the server, you have to configure everything and the system requirements, everything. And for the API purpose, you just start developing your API and complete it and start development your product afterwards.
Think about this. If you are a Node.js developer,
Mhm.
what you'll do is, if you are developing a server, normally we used to develop a server by installing Express, which was a application server development framework. And basically, in that, we used to develop APIs. That if you make this GET request, this is going to happen. This is going to be the parameters. This is going to be the return types. If you're developing a post request, and so on. Therefore, the point I'm trying to say is that nowadays, usually when you develop a server, you develop it in a framework. And using that framework, you are actually developing an API.
Exactly.
Anybody else on it? Because, you know,
Great
people have
system,
difficulty.
perfect.
People have difficulty in following the concepts. Anish, that is usually the problem. Anyway, now
Of course, the problem exists. Let's suppose we have 10 people. Can someone give us a feedback what sort of problems they are facing? So I could include this thing. Actually, the main problem in our students, sir, is very weird. When they are participating in the session or they are reviewing, they never provide any feedback. Feedback is very important thing. If you provide feedback to the creator of the content, he definitely update or upgrade. But actually, we never see any thread of feedback. People mostly silent and never participated. Most of the
Anish,
people.
I won't blame them. In my earlier days, when I was young, of course I'm young right now, but when I was young.
When you were a regular student, huh?
Yeah, I used to be afraid of talking in English as well.
Okay.
And when I reached America, most of the time in the class, in the first few years, I used to remain silent. Because it is not our mother tongue. That is why all three of us are teaching this class in English, so that others overcome their fear of the language. Because it is a general business language, international business language, we have to learn it to be able to do business internationally. But if we were talking in Urdu, we would have a much bigger audience, first of all, and a lot of people will be participating. But in English, that is the case. But our job as teachers is to show the right path to the students. We are not in a popularity context where we want to be popular. We want to be right and do the right thing for our students. We believe that teaching classes in English and communicating in English will benefit everyone. So therefore, we are doing it. Of course, it will be much easier for us also to speak in Urdu, but we have a different class for that. So that we have taken a middle ground. We have an English section and an Urdu section because we cannot sacrifice the English section for the Urdu section. Okay. Anybody else wants to chip in? Or we move forward? Okay, let's move forward. Anish, the point is, if I say I am going to develop an application which is going to be API first.
Yes, sir. This is must-have requirement now.
Yes. If I say
problem, sorry, sir, I'm disturbing you. I want to at least feedback from my side. Now, whenever I decide to start developing a new application, for example, I want to develop an application that would be an AI application or data science application or EDA, I mean exploratory data analysis type of application, or even I want to develop a data warehousing solution. I have to think that I have a multiple sort of clients and I need to work on the API. So now the API is a essential thing to think, or even I get the start from thinking or designing our app when you are designing any solution or any deploying any solution. So this is my problem, that I have to think about the API, that how our API design. But my problem is that I don't know, have a sufficient knowledge, skills, and some framework, some guideline type of things, that how the API would design and what should be the API. Mostly I see some example and try to copy this in my proposed application. So this is the problem from my side.
Hopefully this is going to be solved by the end of this class. But what I'm trying to say is that if I say that I'm going to develop an API and develop an application which is going to be API first, what does it mean, Oves?
So actually in the API first approach, what we do, we analyze many different things. For example, we analyze a problem, what problem we have. So after identifying that problem, we start building the API as compared to in the traditional way. We start building our product first, development first, and then we build our API afterwards. The second approach is to build our product first, then after we move on to the API, development the API. So in that process, because in the coming days, it's just all about the API first approach, because in the API first approach, for example, I have built an API. In that API, it will help me to locate all the popular restaurants near to my area. So I can also sell that idea to other developers, so other developers can use it for their product development. So API is for the API developer. So they consume your API. So it will also beneficial for them and from your side as a web business perspective.
Okay. Therefore, the approach we are recommending, and all the latest books are recommending, is that you develop API first. Now, there is a second concept, which is called design first, as opposed to code first.
Yes.
Now, Wes, what do you mean by design first?
Actually, design first is also similar to that approach, because whenever you want to do anything, we first have to design that thing, that what those elements will be included in that API. For example, if you decide that you want the API first approach, so in the API first approach, what you have to do is you have to do the design first approach. As we have seen in our previous sessions, we have discussed this, that using the design first approach, when you are building the API, so it will help you to recognize what problem and what items and what parameters you want in your API. As compared to the you just start developing your API and then you realize that we want to add this thing and add that thing. So it will, cost you with the time, cost you with the money too. And so it's better to design your API, to include everything in the design process. After the design process is completed, we will move to the API development side, which is code.
Therefore, the idea is that you are going to first develop the APIs. Once you start developing the API, we are going to design the APIs. But the question is, in GraphQL, it was very obvious that you define the schema. In design first, you first design the schema. Now in open APIs, this says you design the open by using the open API specification, which describes your API. Now we have selected this book. This is the latest state-of-the-art book. It is not yet printed, but it is available. What we are going to do is let's start with 1.2.1. We're saying if you're designing an API, let me see, somebody sent a
Send
Raza,
the link.
the link is already there. Just download it. Now, take a look at this. Now, they are giving an example of a person. They want to develop an API. But imagine they start using it and something changes in the API. Anis, imagine this. I'm using your API and you change it. I won't even know whether if you have changed it. My application will crash and I will not be able to use it, but I will not know that you have changed the API. So therefore, what they are suggesting is that every now and then one of the API will change in such a way as to negatively impact and sometimes break the service that rely on it. This disrupts everything. What they want? What they want is, what they are suggesting is that we create a description of the APIs, not the implementation, which contains all the requirements, whether it is going to be a get method.
Sir, can you please enlarge the font size?
Yes. Let me see. It's better?
Yes, sir, it's better.
Sir, quite.
Okay. Now what we want to do is each operation expects an input and generates an equal a resulting output. So therefore APIs are nothing. You just give an input, it gives an output. Now if you change one input or one output, it will create a lot of problems. So what they are suggesting is that in order to track these changes, in order to track these changes, what they are suggesting is that we define the APIs. What do you think? She concludes that tracking those changes is an important part of keeping functionality up. But how will you know? How will she know when an API has changed? If you don't have the specification, how are you going to know that the APIs have changed? So therefore, she has created a requirement document which basically describes the API. But the problem is that if you use a description language, first of all, it will take too much time. Create your own description language. Second of all, the tools you will build around it will be only used by you. So therefore, what they suggest is that we use an open API description of a HTTP-based APIs, which are typically, now you understand this in order to understand this sentence. Open API is a description of the HTTP-based APIs. But they are distinguishing between HTTP-based APIs and Restful APIs. Whereas what's the difference between these two? HTTP-based API and a Restful APIs?
They are, sir, almost same, because in the HTTP based APIs and then in the RESTful APIs, we have all the methods like get, post, patch. We have all that methods, so it's almost same. There's not that much difference.
Yes. Now you have to understand something. There is a difference. Why? If you think about it, all RESTful APIs are HTTP based APIs. But
Yes.
REST is a typical kind of concept. What does it REST say? REST says that everything you define is a resource.
Restful resource.
And resource, for example, let's see. We'll say HTTP APIs can be anything, but a REST API is something different. Let's see, if we have a resource like person, you can create a person, you can update a person, or you can delete the person. Any HTTP API which implements these concepts, that it defines HTTP APIs on the basis of resources, is a RESTful API. Otherwise, what you can do is basically use two verbs, get and put, and do everything. But in a REST, you have all the four CURD operations. Now let's look at an example of a definition. Now look at this thing. We have defined an open API saying version 3.0. Right now we are at 3.1. Then info, the title and the version, the servers, the URL. Now we start with the path. It's saying /breed name /images. It will give you an array of all the images of that particular breed name. Now, how, look at this thing. It's saying the get, it will get. It is not a post, it is a get. You understand the difference between get and post? What is the difference between get and post?
Actually, if you want to fetch the data from the API, you use the get method. And if you want to post anything, for example, if you want to insert your data into API, so we will use the post method for that.
In the get method, all the request is contained in the URL.
Yes.
In the post, you already also send a page with it, which contains all the, a document with it, which contains all the requests. So therefore, it's saying, you just give me a URL. It gives a description. Then it says, what are the parameters? It says, parameters is path. In path, what does it mean? Name is breed name. Look at this thing. Breed name. Breed name. It's saying the breed name is going to be inside the path, like here. And what is the schema of this? It's a string. And it's saying example is, you just type in hound. Hound is a type of breed. And responses will be 200, which means okay, all is okay. And description is it list of dog images, and content is application JSON, schema, type, object, properties. It gives you an array of all the dogs with the URLs. Now, how do we use this API? You're saying the host is dog.co.api. Now look at this thing. HTTPS dog.co.api. I am going to basically copy this. This is the base URL. What is it? It is the base URL. In the base URL, I'm just going to, this is the get method. Now this is the base URL. Now let's go back. It's saying Look at this thing. Breed/breed name. I'm just copying it. Now what you have to do is, instead of breed name, because it is a variable name, I'm going to give you a breed name. It has suggested hound. Now this is the complete URL. I just read it from the Open API specification.
So try to give it without the brackets, I think.
I think what I did was, let me check. I made a mistake. Breed, HOU, hound. Here we go. So therefore, just by looking at the URL, this is the base URL from here to here. Breed/hound. Hound is a parameter and it is included in the path and so on. We already covered that. List of type string. An example was a hound. It was required. If I don't give it, the URL will not be correct. And it will give me an array of all the things.
So, sir, on defining the, if we want to define the definition for the Open API, they are saying they are using the structure using the YAML.
Yes, we are going to cover this later on. Right now, they did not tell us at this juncture that they are using YAML.
They just show us the example.
Which is basically a superset of JSON. Therefore, in Open API specification, you define how the API is going to respond. And Wes, don't you find it very useful? Otherwise, we were discussing it in the office. You were saying something. Could you repeat it for the students?
Actually, the problem is that in the last sessions, when we developed the book API, for example, I'm the developer of the book API, and I developed that RESTful API for the development purpose. Now, it's whether I just know what the API has, what parameter is, or whether I just share with someone. Anyone don't know what those API will do. If I give anyone that API, so how the person will know what I have to post in that, or what data I have to fetch that. So by defining the definition of that API, of the RESTful API, we can easily know that what the API does do. For example, what that get method do, what parameters they have. We can also define our post method. So by defining our definition for the RESTful API, it is easier for the developer to know what exactly and what data they want from that specific API.
Exactly. So therefore, it helps you. Any questions before we move forward? Okay. Now look at this diagram. Yes. Wes, would you like to explain this diagram?
Yeah, sure, sir. Actually, what they are saying that if you see that the Open API definition, this is the main column, and it is in the middle of that diagram. And by using that Open API definition, we can use and consume many things from that. For example, you can design and create your code. After creating your code, you can create and extract data from that API definition. You can also generate an API docs You can also generate your mock APIs, mock servers, and you can also create a planned SDK, because once you develop the definition for the API, so using that definition, you can do that all the multiple purpose. So it is easier for the developer to develop their product or whatever they want to build.
Okay. Now look at this thing. We saying you can define a open API definition using editor, which we'll learn in the next class, or you can use, for example, in Java or TypeScript, you can define the APIs, and in the annotation, you basically define the specification. I prefer this approach. This is code first approach. This is design first approach. Now I prefer this. And you generate an open API definition in the editor. Once you have opened the API definition, you can generate the API doc. You can generate server and stuff and mocks. You can develop a client SDK. You can do all these things. Just because you have a, and we can do exactly the same thing in GraphQL. But open API is for RESTful and HTTP based APIs, and GraphQL is for another kind of APIs which we already studied. So therefore, we have learned this. Now, whenever we discuss open APIs, a lot of people use, instead of open APIs, use Swagger. Actually, open APIs started with Swagger. It was a company which basically developed a Swagger UI, and basically that UI, that application used to develop YAML files describing the HTTP endpoints. But now it has been handed over to Linux Foundation, and now they have renamed it to Open API. But the tools are already still being used with the Swagger name. Therefore, when you are talking about specifications, you always define open APIs. You should use Open API. But of course, there are different tools. Smart Beer is the company which retains the right. They have given it to Linux, open sourced it, but the brand Swagger, they keep it. So they have a editor called Swagger UI, which basically helps you write Open API specification, which we will learn in the next class. How to use the Swagger editor, how to use the Swagger UI, and how to use the Swagger parser, and so on. At least a dozen more. All of them are produced by Smart Beer. REST, I've already discussed it a little bit. As I told you, REST is a kind of HTTP API, but the whole focus idea is of a resource. Resource can be a user account, a billing reminder, or anything else. Now, what they are suggesting is, when should you use Open API? They are saying if you are not using a GraphQL API, defining a, you should always use the Open API specification. Of course, they will say it, but it makes sense that if you are defining a HTTP based API, you should start with Open API specification. And it also helps you on the client side. It helps you develop the server. It also helps you develop the SDK and so on. Somebody wants to ask a question?
Does it only support YAML, or we can do write specifications in JSON as well?
You can, basically, YAML is a superset of JSON. So therefore, anything which is JSON is a valid YAML. Just like TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. In the same way, YAML is a superset of JavaScript. JSON.
Yes. So we have to write in YAML.
Yes. But it's very easy. We do it with editors. We'll learn that in the next class. So therefore, it is helpful for API consumers as well as API producers. For API designers, it helps you design the API and so on.
Thank you.
Open, let's read the summary. Open API is a specification for describing HTTP-based APIs, most notably RESTful APIs. Swagger is a trademark set of tools for smart beer. Describing APIs into a definition, that is a YAML file, allows you to leverage tools to help automate a lot of API-related processes. We at Penacloud are also doing it. We use either GraphQL schema or Open API to develop APIs on the cloud. It helps you develop APIs in the cloud. Open API is useful for customers, producers, API designers, and all of them are helped by this. Now, in this second chapter, we are only going to basically cover it in a very short way. What they are saying is, we are going to, in this class, we are going to use an API called farm stall, and we are going to we have already covered Postman. We are going to use Postman to use query that API and so on. So therefore, we have already covered Postman. What basically they are saying is that, let's look at the APIs. If we say review, and then we say query parameter max rating, from 1 to 5 inclusive. Of course, it is a GET request, therefore the body is not applicable. We'll get a response. Or we will do a post on reviews and send a message which we say was good and rating was 5. So therefore, you can do both these things from the same URL /reviews, base plus reviews. We are going to cover it in later. So therefore, we are going to set up Postman, and it helps you in this chapter. It's not very good for us in the sense that look at this URL. We have already covered it. Therefore, this will be the URL which we are going to discuss in detail throughout the book. We are going to use this max rating is equal to 5, use this in Postman, paste it, and basically send it. And we'll get a response. We have already covered this in the previous classes, how to use Postman. Now let's move over to the third chapter. Uwais,
Yes, sir.
would you like to, before we move to the third chapter, let me just come to the third chapter. Revise what we have covered so far.
So far, actually, we have just discussed that what is Open API and why we need to use the Open API. So as we have just discussed that, we have the problem with the RESTful APIs. If a person just developed that API, it has a limitations related to the specification and the changes of that API, and to share with the other developers and other people related to those API which have just developed. To solve that problem, we comes up with the point of the Open API definition. By defining the Open API definition, we have just seen that how you can define and what include in the Open API definition. So by that, we do not have to, just share the document and share everything with an individual person. We just have to share the definition of that API to the person. So everyone can just easily understand it, that what the API will do. By defining the definition, we will include the get method. In get method, we define which parameter we need. We define our post method. So by that, it will easier for the developer to understand what does the API will do.
Yes, very nicely covered. Now let's, chapter 3 is where the meat is. We start thinking about, now look at next thing, open API definition. We are going to discuss this. In the next chapter, we are going to discuss the design, how to create it. But right now, we are just going to look at a very small segment of the open API. And look at the segment. As we mentioned, farmstall.something.com/v1. The language is YAML. You can go and check out yaml.org. And the specification is open API specification. Now,
Sir, before we proceed to next part, I need to ask one more thing, which is quite confusing. When we talk about the REST API and the normal API, we have already used API and endpoint. So what is the difference about these API we have designed in our earlier bootcamp session? In the end, the open API, is there is some design differences or something else? This is a bit confused.
The thing is, Anish, when we defined the HTTP APIs and REST APIs, we were not discussing the open API specification. We were just discussing how to use it. Now, for example, the book API, which we discussed and covered in the class. Now we are discussing how to define it using the open API specification, which the implementation is going to be exactly the same as before. But the problem is that if we don't use a open API or any other kind of specification, if it changes, nobody knows. So therefore, before defining the API, we define the open API specification. It's the same thing. Only open API talks about the definition, and we were talking previously about the implementation. As
okay,
we go forward,
okay, the open API is some sort of specification and guideline that provide you how we should describe or design our API. That's it.
Exactly. Actually, how to describe the API, to be more exact.
Okay.
For example, if you want to create a house, build a house, this is open API specification is the architecture. You know, if you go to architect, he is not going to build you the house. He is going to help you design it and give you a map, a complete diagram of the house. Of course, you can build a house without the architecture, but it will not be too good. Up to now, what we were doing is, when we were talking about HTTP APIs, we were learning how to build the house. Now we are learning how to design the house and how to describe the house.
Sir Anish, it is also similar to the TypeScript concept. If you remember that in the JavaScript, if we have any type, so in that type we define that what that method will do, what parameter the method should have. For example, the method have the ID, the name, and the string values. If we do another parameter, it will give us the error because it is not defined in the type of that TypeScript method. So it is just like that. In the APIs, we first define our type, that what will our APIs will do. After that, we develop that API. So it is easy for the developers to understand that what it will have. And in the future, if anyone wants to know that what changes in the APIs have, so they can directly just go to the Swagger UI. They can easily just navigate to this and they find the updated parameters there.
Now, let's move forward. Any questions? Mr. Bashir, you have a question? Not right now, it seems. Let's move forward. Now, let's discuss the parameter. This is a fragment. This is not a complete open API specification, but If I show you the complete open API specification, it will be too confusing. So therefore, what they are doing is they are showing you small segments, which we are calling a fragment. The part is reviews, then you put colon, and you put a tab. This is a YAML way of describing it. There's a space. You put a tab. It does not matter. In YAML, just do it consistently. It can be 1 space, 2 space, 5 spaces, whatever you want to do. And then you say get colon, then you say description, get a list of reviews. Parameter is max rating in query. Now it is saying, previously it was saying in parameter, in path. Now it's saying in query. And the schema is number. Then the type of is number. So therefore, and the response will be 200 and will a list of reviews. We are not going to look at the response to keep it very simple. This is a request, a simple GET request. Now, if you look at it, if you basically make it into a table using from reading that the max rating, review below this rating, query, and type is number, notes is equal to 1 to 5 inclusive. Now look at this thing. This is a more detailed view. Now look at this thing. We start with saying open API 3.0.0, the path of the URL, URI / reviews, whatever the base URL is, it's saying / reviews. Add that. Then the method is get. It can be post. It can be other things also. The description is get gives you a bunch of reviews. The list of parameters. Now look at this thing, dash before name. What does it mean? We are going to just cover YAML. It means it's going to be a number of, it's basically array. Name, max rating, and description is this, filters in query, schema is equal to number, response is equal to 200. Now before we go, I will come back to this thing, but before let's look at first JSON. JSON is very simple. Right now, most of the thing has become the standard of communication between machine to machine. If you send a message from one machine to another machine, usually it is form of JSON because all languages are supporting it. Basically, in JSON, you either have an object with curly brackets or array with square brackets. And JSON format is so simple that the whole specification comes in one card. On one card, you can have look at the whole specification. And basically, YAML is a superset of JSON. Now let's see. Let's understand YAML. If I say some number :1, if I say some string : you don't even have to put a quotation mark, small or big. You can do it, but without quotation, it also works. Then you can say is something : true. So therefore, here we use the integer, here we use the string, here we use the boolean. Now, how do you write comments? This number sign, and then you write a comment. How you write the object? In JSON, you write curly brackets as object. In YAML, you don't change it much, just a little bit. Some object, : and then key value pair. Then again this, again a key value pair. So therefore, in number 1, we have defined these 3. We define variables. This was a comment. This is an object. Here, this is a nested object, and it is a list. In a list, you start with a dash. Of course, you can also write here. This was the object. You can also write like this. Some old school JSON object. You start with a curly bracket. This will also work. Same old JSON array. You can also write like this. And if you trying to write multiple lines of string, you basically put there are a number of different ways to do it, but this is one of the ways. And then you write multiple string in multiple lines. Otherwise, string will, because there is no quotation, so therefore it won't know how when it ends. YAML supports comments. Strings do not need to wrap in quotes. YAML uses indentation to nest objects. Basically, you use a tab or spaces. You only have to be consistent within the scope, map, or sequence. If, for example, you are saying object has these elements, so therefore, if you are giving 2 spaces, do it consistently. The YAML parcel will understand. YAML is a superset of JSON. YAML supports multi-line strings in a different number of different ways. I think somebody's mic is open. Bashir, I think your mic is open. Okay. Now, look at this thing. We are writing the same thing in JSON. JSON is a little bit difficult. You have to put quotation mark here. Then you have to put quotation mark here. In YAML, you don't have to do that. You have to put curly brackets. In YAML, you don't have to do that. In arrays, you have to put square brackets. But you can do both. In YAML, you put a dash here. You don't have to put quotation. It just makes it easier for both the machines. Actually, it is designed for humans, YAML, and JSON for designed for machines. So it is a middle ground. Both machines can read it or also humans can read it. Would you, Uwais, like to shed some light on YAML?
Yeah, sure, sir. Actually, as I just said, that the YAML is a superset for the JSON, and basically the YAML is easier in a purpose of the readable in a human way, and it is a data serialized language. And if you go with the full form of that, it just says that yet and markup language. So they do not call it a markup language. So it is basically used for the data serialized, where you have a data. And for example, in the application, you have seen that they use YAML in the configuration file to store their data or to transmit their data for the application purpose. So for that, because it is easier for the human readability and also for the machine. So in this segment for the open API, we will use the YAML as compared to JSON.
Yes. So therefore, YAML is the language for open API specification.
Exactly.
Kubernetes is also using it. A lot of other tools have started using it.
Actually, YAML is a preferable approach for the open API. So everyone can adopt it and write their specification for the APIs.
Yes. So therefore, look at this thing. Quotation mark means the object starts. In that object, you have a get. In that get, it is a nested object. In the get, this is the description. This is in the get, this is the responses, and so on. Think of it as JSON. Now look at this thing. Name, what is this? This is talking about the parameter. Name of the parameter is max rating. Description is this. In query, it means after question mark, it will appear after question mark in the URL. And the schema, it is show as a number. Now look at this thing. Now we have a query in it. It's a review. If a get object, first of all, there's a review object. Then there is a get object. Then in the get, there's a key value pair. Then we start with the nested thing, parameters, and this quotation, this sign says it's array. So therefore, there can be multiple parameters. And this thing, schema type, this is also an object, type is equal to number. This is easy. Just have to have a little practice of reading YAML. Well, let's finish off this class. Today is a lot of theory and a lot of concepts. We have covered 3 chapters, and everybody what we are basically doing is, let me share the this book is a very good book which very easily conveys all the material about OpenAPI specifically. I'm going to start off by saying, just revising the whole thing, and then Ovais is going to revise, and maybe Anish Bhai is going to revise everything. We have time. When you define an API, the recommended approach is, before defining the UI and all the rest of the application, you define the APIs. Basically, you're writing the server using a framework. But before even defining writing APIs, you define it. This is called API design first. Therefore, it is API first, and then it is API design first. In the API design first, what basically you do is the user either use GraphQL schemas or OpenAPI specification to define the APIs. OpenAPI specification is used for Restful and HTTP APIs, which is more or less, if you think about it, more or less the same thing, except for the fact all REST APIs are basically HTTP APIs. And then what we have learned is this OpenAPI specification uses YAML to define the APIs. And basically in this YAML, you define, just like we are doing in listing 3.7, that all the parameters, all the URLs, all the base URLs, all the paths, everything is defined here. By looking at it, there are 2 things. First of all, the developer knows what the API provides. The second thing is, you can, using these APIs, other tools can also read these API, these specifications, OpenAPI specifications. For example, if you want to create a SDK, which is a client-side development kit, so that clients can call the APIs, you can use OpenAPI specification. Once it is there, it will automatically generate SDK for you. The same applies to what do you call GraphQL APIs. Therefore, it will help you in defining the client SDKs as well as servers. It will help you develop a mock server. It will help you develop a mock a stub for the server where you can write your code. We are developing tools. PanaCloud is developing tools for OpenAPI as well as RESTful APIs, so that it will help you create applications, create APIs just by defining an application. And just after that, you will just define it will create all the infrastructure for you, and you will just use the stubs to define your things. Wes, over to you.
Okay, thank you, sir. To sum up all things, Open API, it's not that complicated a topic or a complicated thing. It's a basically, just take as a type definitive for the API purpose. As you guys are doing with the TypeScript, now we are doing it with the Open API for the API purpose, which is specifically a RESTful and HTTP based APIs. So for that APIs, two things are very important in the Open API segment. That once you define your definition for that API. Second, using the Swagger UI in the next classes, we will use that. It will make more easier to understand what the Open API definition is doing. After we define our code in the Swagger, it will convert it in a UI based format. So when we want to give anything to the other developers, so they easily can see using the Swagger UI what this API exactly do. So it is easier to understand that. So until now, as sir have just said, that in the Open API we are using the Yaml because it is a preferable and the easier approach to define our definition for the APIs. So that's it. If anyone has any question up till now, they can ask.
Anish, would you like to add anything?
Not sir, so much actually. There is a background noise today around my house.
Okay,
There is a
no problem,
milad
no
actually, so that's why I'm speaking. Trying to keep my mouth mic.
No problem. No problem. Okay, see you guys.
But I'm very good with understanding that the today's content in actually the base or the how should we design the API, and that's good enough for me.
Okay, thank you so much. Any other question? Okay, thank you everyone. See you in the next class, and we'll start covering chapter number 4. Thank you. Bye bye.